Today's topic is Pivot to Inspiration, Creating in Times of Crisis. So I'd love to do a quick intro to our speakers. We have Joe Kirgues, Fernando Garibay, and Dana Flor.
Hey everybody, my name is Marion. Good to see you guys again. We made it to Friday. That's really awesome. It's very exciting that we've done that. We had a full week of programming and we're thrilled that you stuck with us for this week, and we hope you learned a little something, met some new people, followed up to get a little bit of extra one-on-one support. If you go back to that Business of a Brand Splash That page way down at the bottom, you can sign up for a bunch of different support from our folks there for one-on-one. So we're excited about that. I'm excited to really quickly chat with Joe. You can see him right there. He's got a baseball cap on. We're really excited to have you here, Joe. Thank you for being a part of this. And I wanted to know if you could give a second to tell people what the heck is Generator?
Yeah, thank you. Generator, we co-founded it 8 years ago. And our mission is we want to be the best partner for a community to invest into itself. And we think communities do that best when they're the most passionate about investing into their next generation. So we've built a store with 4 products to do that. We run a venture fund through the accelerator model, where it's kind of like a startup version, an offline version of American Idol. We get 1,000 applicants, we choose the top 5, and then we do everything we can for 12 weeks to help them grow. So we've done over 100 startups. They've created over 4,000 jobs. And we're the highest ranked program outside of LA, San Francisco, and New York. So we're a top 15 program. But we're proud to enable that in communities that are, the size of Washington, D.C. or where I'm from, Milwaukee. So that's the first product. We run a G-Beta program. To my knowledge, that program works with more universities than any accelerator in the country, including the universities of Wisconsin, Minnesota, Nebraska, Illinois, Case Western Reserve, et cetera. Corporations like Microsoft and Universal Music Group, which is how I met Fernando, and cities like the city of Houston, the city of Cleveland, the state of Indiana, where we sign contracts to help commercialize startups. So we don't take any equity. We just have startups come in and help them grow. We pivoted into that with social impact programming to help businesses from all sorts of range, whether they're interested in venture capital or not. And then into music and art, where we built the Backline program for musicians and Fellowship.art for artists. It's a 12-week program. We just give them money across a budget, but we work with them on anything from mental health and wellness to meeting top gallerists and music labels and friends like Fernando. And that program expanded recently into Detroit with a partnership with Universal Music Group and the Motown Museum on the Motown Accelerator in Cleveland. Is recently, I'm proud of them. I'm not a very cool person, so I'm particularly proud of this. We were named by Fast Company as one of the top 10 most innovative companies in music this year, which for a startup accelerator, I think was something we never imagined possible, and we're really proud of. And then finally, we have a corporate group. So we have 50 corporations we work with. And we work with them on corporate innovation and venture capital, and now on corporate and social impact. So thank you for having us. We have over 54 employees across 22 cities. We've been running emergency response programs right after the crisis hit, and that has led to this incredible partnership with you, Marianne and Lee, and this opportunity to collaborate with creatives through this program in Washington, D.C. So thank you so much for having us. It's a real pleasure to do this, and I can't believe I get to talk to Dana and Fernando today about creativity, especially at one of, I think, the most tension-filled but also possibility-filled periods of my life. So thank you, Dana and Fernando, for joining us, and Marianne and Lee for making this possible.
You are more than welcome, and that's my cue to get out of the way to let you guys have that conversation. Thank you so much.
Very cool. Thank you again. Thanks again. So with that, I want to introduce Dana and Fernando. And I thought it'd be best for both of you maybe to just give us a little bit about your story in the context of your creative past. As you see yourself as a creative, tell us a little bit about where that story begins and how we get to now. And Dana, if you wouldn't mind, I'd love it if you could kick it off and just introduce yourself in that model.
Sure. My name's Dana Flor, and I am a documentary filmmaker. I started off as a journalist covering Latin America, working for Reuters and Telemundo and CNN en Español and various other organizations. Did a lot of stories about poverty in Latin America and aid, international aid. And I tired of being a journalist and a news producer because I was interested in stories that weren't being told and stories that had more nuance and stories that could possibly have an impact. And so I sort of morphed into being a documentary filmmaker. And so when I talk about my films, a film is a collaborative effort. So it's not, none of them are my films. They belong to the editors, the cinematographers, the producers, and all those people. But my first film was about Cesar Chavez, who was a labor leader and formed the United Farm Workers. And so that was a film that was later used as a teaching tool by the UFW. And I really wanted, and I continue to want my films to not just be entertainment, not just a movie that you spend 78 minutes or 92 or whatever, you know, just checking something out, but something that had legs, something that had impact, something that could actually make a difference. I did another film called Latinos in Baseball, which was about how Latinos were actually one of the first to break the color barrier. And then my first independent documentary was about Marion, the infamous mayor of Washington, D.C. And my latest film is called Check It, about a African-American gang in Washington, D.C. So it's a group of LGBTQ marginalized youth who formed a gang to protect themselves. In and out of jail, working as sex workers, it was pretty dire existence. And after the films came out, the film helped form what was called Check It Enterprises, which is now a very successful organization in Washington, D.C. So we took a group of kids that were in and out of jail, working as sex workers, stealing, all kinds of stuff, and now they have their own business. They just recently got a $2 million grant, for which I am so proud of them, to buy their own buildings on MLK in Washington, D.C., which is where the community center, Check It Enterprises Community Center, is right now. And the community center, they have their own fashion line. We're starting a culinary school. It is going to be the home of the Go-Go Museum. And for people who don't know what Go-Go is, it's an indigenous form of music in D.C. And it's also a place for local musicians to perform. There's a space in the back. It is a place where people can go to get support, financial, emotional, things as basic as masks, things like that. So I'm so proud of what Check It has done, and it sort of embodies what my goal as a filmmaker is to not just make a film, but make a film that helps positive change, basically.
Well, and I think just even going back to the start of that, to have a role in the food workers, hearing their history in that context, I think it speaks to, it's not just a message to convey empathy, it's a message to convey change. And that's
right.
And I guess with that bridge to Fernando, I'd love to, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself in your context. And again, I'm privileged to be talking to two people who use creativity to create social change. And so Dana, you're on my left on my screen. Fernando, you're on my right. So it's a pretty cool privilege. But Fernando, maybe you could give your story.
Yeah, I mean, Dana, it's incredible work you've done and continue doing. It's very inspiring, considering, I've mentioned before, I have family workers who work on the fields where Cesar Chavez, had his protest and defended, our people from severe plights that they had to overcome, and still overcoming. So that being said, I'll give you a brief. I'm horrible at this introductions, but Joe, I might need your help for this. But I call myself an autodidact because I've learned how to succeed in what I set my mind to, and it started with this idea that I'm going to dedicate the rest of my life to making music that changes the world, because it changed my life as a 7-year-old, 8-year-old, 6-year-old. And I picked up whatever instrument, learned it, did whatever I could to get to the next step of sharing the music that I made. And turn 15, 16, I meet these legendary producers, conductors and composers. Jojo Moroder introduced me to more people, and meet Enrique Iglesias and incredible artists along the way. And I start creating with them, and they see skills that I didn't see of value, and they make me realize that I can use these skills to create more incredible music with these artists. And lo and behold, producers born and songwriters born. I had no idea these were actual skills that were valuable to the world. I didn't know how to apply these to make a living. All I knew is that I had to do it. And around 16, 17, I then meet Jimmy Iovine, the head of Universal Music, Interscope Records. And Jimmy Iovine's like the godfather of our industry. He's one of the most influential people of all time in the music industry, and became a mentor. And I spent, 10, 15 years and almost 20 now in the Interscope building. That's Interscope Universal, and worked with every single artist they had under their umbrella, as well as a few outside artists such as Whitney Houston, Britney Spears. Then eventually Jimmy introduced me to this young and up and coming star named Lady Gaga, and we make what's called the Born This Way album together, and amongst other records such as Dance in the Dark and Fame Monster Records music. And from there, I realized, I didn't know why I was doing what I was doing, other than, again, I had to. But then I realized that, hey, I have something to shoot for. How about awards? And that, that gave me some focal point. But I quickly realized that after receiving accolades, that wasn't fulfilling. And you hear the story a lot. And it's a privileged story in a sense of success privilege. But quickly realized that wasn't fulfilling enough for me. Awards don't keep you warm at night. Awards don't keep you real company. So I got into the academic space by default and by accident. I started getting invited to speak on creativity, how I sustained my creativity for years, and continue to do so to this day. And in this process, I didn't realize I had the hack. I have this hack for education that is trade something of value to learn something of value. And, I made friends with a lot of professors at Harvard Business School and MIT and these prestigious universities. And I traded curriculums. They taught me a bit of the Harvard Business School courses. And then I started mentoring there and started mentoring at MIT. And I started to realize the exchange rate for trading our industry secrets, so to speak, and material. It was very valuable, and a lot of people were interested in learning how we made hits. And then we started this cross collaboration of mentoring, and we started the Garibay Center so we can further facilitate the growth of next generation artists, the development and growth and sustaining of creativity of existing artists. And then we found the alignment with Joe, after meeting Joe, with the corporate America and corporate executives to exchange, again, our thought leadership and creativity for impact-driven initiatives, such as the work we've been doing together with Procter & Gamble, such as the work we've been doing together with a few other institutions. And leads us to this conversation now.
Very cool. Thank you, Bill. And I'd like to point out, Fernando, one of the things I'm proud of is I've become friends. You helped start the Born This Way Foundation with Lady Gaga, which I've heard from people who've met you how much the work you did with that spoke to them. So I just want to highlight that as somewhere where I've been in the room where people talked about what that meant in terms of just the inclusion and celebration of who they were. So just want to take a moment to celebrate that.
Sure. Yeah. So Gaga was complete driver of, when we did Born This Way album, we had no idea of what its true essence would be, other than here's the framework, here's the idea. We're going to write a musical, right? And a musical in the sense of here's a great framework to write a story. And she was inspired by all the social injustice that was happening around that time, around 2010. I think we started 2010, 2011. And there was a lot of, prejudice against LGBT plus community. Before it was plus, it was just LGBT. And there was huge social injustice against the Latino community, Mexican community, and South American community as a whole. And, she wanted to do something that touched on both sides. And I think this is part of my influence on this body of work is she figured out what's the best way to include everybody in this conversation, right? Who was being marginalized at that time and was part of the conversation for impact, right? How can we create a real change? How can we, we have this huge vehicle. She's the biggest star. She still is today the biggest star on the planet. And what can we do, right? Besides make great music. And, I don't know how it came up, but I think it was her what she was going through at the time, but she had this idea of falling in love. What if I fell in love with a Mexican woman from East LA? Right? This is where I grew up, South Central East LA. That whole area is predominantly Latino. And in this way, we kind of include the whole conversation. It's everybody in there, like who's being marginalized in this at that time. And so we wrote this narrative of I can't help who it was. She did, I was a supporting role. I was a bit of the motivator, but she had this idea. I can't help who I love, but I can help who I love. Right. So I think that's the message, the underpinning kind of message of the whole project. And from that sprouted this incredible album that made an impact. And then obviously the Born This Way Foundation. So it's driven by that. I can't speak for the foundation specifically, but I can say that the underlying tone is inclusivity and brought by this message of this album.
And going from Los Angeles to Washington, D.C., Dana, you've been a member of, worked with Marion to the current documentary, and the world's eyes have been glued to Washington, D.C. The Black Lives Matter plaza is now iconic, and some of the things that maybe weren't as iconic that we'll remember in the past few months. How do you, and I'll ask this both of you, but Dana, how do you think about creativity, especially someone who's taken creativity into action? How do you think about creativity in this time? Now we have COVID, but you're in the center of a movement that has changed the country more than anything else in the last decade. How are you thinking about your role in that, and specifically creativity in that role?
Well, it's a really interesting time to be alive, that's for sure. And it's a fascinating time to be in DC. I've never seen anything like it. It's very exciting. It's very electric. But at the same time, I think all of us around the world are experiencing amazing limitations on our lives as artists. I'm a filmmaker. In order to make films, I have to go outside and shoot. And I haven't been able to. I have had one shoot, for example, where I was filming in a sound studio just recently in North Carolina, and everyone involved was kind of terrified to do it, and we're all wearing masks, and it's hot, and we're suffocating, and the lens is steaming up. And so there's a lot of limitations, just physical and sort of nuts and bolts limitations of oh my God, how am I going to do this, right? But then a lot of us are filming via Zoom. This is an amazing new medium, and I'm doing lots of shooting via Zoom, which is really weird and really strange. And I thought in the beginning, oh, this kind of sucks. And then you're like, wait a second, there's an intimacy to it, which is really strange. So, there are a lot in terms of the nuts and bolts of producing, there's lots of pluses and there's also minuses, but I do think we're in a unique opportunity. And then as a creative, and in my world of creative people, mostly right now, musicians and filmmakers, I think so many of us are having this experience what an incredible and golden opportunity, because the whole world has stopped and everything is slowed down and we can't move, or our movement is very limited. And so as creators, a lot of us want to be lost in our heads. We want to chase that idea or that weird thing we were working on, or that novel in the drawer or whatever. And so that's an opportunity, that's a huge opportunity. And then in terms of the activism that's going on, the tumultuous era that we're living in, I don't think there's ever been a time in our lifetimes, for sure, where artists and the voice of artists have been more important. I see our role, I have always seen our role as artists as being a responsibility. I don't care what you're doing. I think all art is political, honestly. I don't care if you're painting a painting or blowing a glass vase. I think it's political, and I think that there's a unique opportunity that we as artists have to be part of the dialogue, to be an important part of positive change. And so I think that's very exciting. It's exciting, it's terrifying, but I think it's an incredible creative environment that I'm very inspired by it personally.
And Fernando, same to you. I mean, how are you thinking about and building on Dana? It seems like, how are you guys thinking about being creative? Again, just given it's almost like two hurricanes at once. And how do you even process how to orient yourself?
Yeah. So to touch on Dana's comments, I think they're dead on, spot on as far as creatives are concerned. Art is reflective of not only your life, but of your experiences and how your life is shaped, how your worldview is shaped, right? So beyond epigenetics and your legacy, your heretic history, it's the environment you're in, right? So everything you create is an expression of that. So obviously, the circumstances we're in you're going to hear it in the music, you're going to see it in the films, you're going to see it in the talks, you're going to see it, you're going to read about it. So it's all around you. It's all encompassing. So I 100% agree with this. So how I see and how I stabilize and normalize my world, my crazy in my head and beyond, how I express that is this thought of reinvention. And to Dana's point, I think think about this. Have you ever had, I know I had this fantasy before, but what if life gave you the ultimate pause button, right? What if life gave you an opportunity to restart? What if life flattened the success rate, right? What would you do with that? Right? And that's the key question I ask myself every day. I've been asking myself before this happened. It's what would I do? And so I wake up every morning asking myself this question. If today, I have another similar philosophical kind of esque question that motivates me is, if today's my last day, how am I going to spend it? Right? And it started, and then I'll go one step backwards and how this way of thinking came about for me to become a normalized part of my day. If this is the last song I'm going to write, what would that be about? How would that sound? And why would I serve it to people? Right. So now fast track to today. This restart, this idea of a restart, this idea of the ultimate pause button. Well, what's a pause button for? Right. Well, what's pause? It's so you can do other things, but what if those other things became everything? Right. And that everything is, what's the most important thing to you? Right. What is, and now we removed if you block out the noise and block out everything that's going on just for a second, right? And take a real pause and ask yourself, what is the most important thing for me, right? At this moment, what is the most important thing for the people around me at this moment, right? And usually the predominant answer lies along the lines of, beyond survivalism, beyond I need to eat, beyond that is your inner well-being and your heart and your soul, right? And once those needs are understood, or once you become aware that you have needs, that's the critical pivot point to become more aware of what your life can look like, right? So it all boils down to awareness of what means something to you, right? Pivoting from what your needs are, right? Those are really critical, right? As we start to, before we even take advantage of restarting our career or maybe pivoting to a new career, maybe, realizing that this is a great opportunity to look at how what I'm doing now isn't meaningful for me, like reality check, right? So this is how I see it as more opportunistic. Now, yes, there's incredible social injustice happening again. There's incredible economic crisis is happening again. There are so many things we could look at as far as we want to avoid learned helplessness, right? The psychological phenomenon where, after you've been kicked down a lot, you tend not to want to get up again, right? Psychologically. the way to even get that out of the conversation is by looking at and blocking out the noise and focusing on your inner needs, back to that point again. But I hope that starts to illustrate a bit of my view set on what sustains me and how I monitor myself and why I get up in the morning, how I sustain my creativity as well.
And can I piggyback a little bit on that? I was thinking as you were talking, I think the whole phenomena of COVID is actually an incredible metaphor for how the world finds itself right now, because we need each other. It sounds corny and kind of stupid, but when you look at it on a pandemic level, what I do is really important to what you do and your brother does and your uncle does and that person who's holding the gas pump and stuff like that. But I also think that the pandemic on a wider sense and what's going on in terms of social justice is that we are all connected. And again, sounds a little bit like a cliche, but I think it's really vital. And I think it also connects to creativity and art and collaboration and working with each other. But I see COVID as this huge metaphor about how this broad connection has never been more important than ever before. It really, it's a kind of survival. If we don't collaborate with one another, will we even survive as a species? So I think that art has a really big role to play in that as well, because I do think, and I feel like one thing that is changing is that the artist community, I think, is trying to be more cohesive. I think everyone is trying to be. We're reaching out. There's more collaboration, and there needs to be more collaboration, especially when you put art in the context of art as a vehicle and a tool for social change. It's critical. It's critical community cohesion and working with one another.
Absolutely. And before Joe, you ask the next question, sustain that idea is art is collaborative in its nature, right? Since day one, there's never been such as ideas are formed through evolutionary thought process, right? We piggyback off the past. Right, but that's so important. Art is collaborative, and it's the fact that we're all meant to be connected, and why that's how our prefrontal cortex works. I mean, we're wired to connect, right? And so those are key points. Great content, great art is done together, collaboratively. If you look at the hit, I mean, one case study is look at Billboard charts or any charts, Spotify, anything. It's the top records, I say 98%, 99% are collaborative records. They're all collaborated. There's multiple songwriters, multiple creators. It's impossible now to not create together, and it's a lot more engaging and meaningful that way as well.
You're both so successfully creative. You're both at the top of your fields on this, and it's interesting to hear. Dana, when you started, you talked about film as kind of a collaborative effort. And Fernando's building on that theme, and it's in the context of wellness that Fernando introduced it, and then you kind of took it with community. And I feel like it's this kind of the resounding theme of the conversation so far has been collaboration and been community and been personal wellness. I mean, do you feel as if you meet a creative right now, is that the advice you're giving? Or are you how someone says, hey, like how help me get through this and express myself? Am I kind of capturing what you guys would be giving to that artist, or is there more to it, do you think?
I'll just kick this off, because when you're dealing with best in class, and thank you for that. When you're dealing with best in class, this is already assumed. When you're thinking with, if you look at the best players in basketball, this is already assumed. So, or sports, et cetera, right? What I'm getting from those that already understand this and live this life of like, hey, I'm really effective at working together and working collaboratively, right? And I understand where to sit in teams. I understand leadership and dynamics, particularly empathic leadership. That's what yields the highest successful cohorts of creativity. Empathic leadership, understanding each other's, creating the safe spaces. I have multiple versions of this I can discuss, but beyond that, it's how are you doing today? Like that, I think it's the most. I think it's the most important question you can ask. And a good friend, Valerie Shepard, reintroduced me to that idea of, instead of asking, asking key questions is the way to start these creative conversations. But one of the most effective questions these days is how are you doing today, right? But Dana, I'll kick it off to you.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure I have a lot to add to that. I think that art has always been a form of communication. It's speaking. You have something to say, but you want other people to see it or to hear it, or it's a way of reaching out. And I think that's really critical. And again, creatives who are asking advice right now, I think community and building community and collaborating has never been more critical. I think speaking out has never been more critical. And those are very sort of community building moves to make, you know. Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky time because we're all feeling kind of cuckoo crazy, isolated. I know I am. So it's a delicate time as well, you know. And I think that art is a powerful tool. And I think that art, and I'm not talking about art for artists. I'm talking about, I believe all humans are artists. I believe anybody can make art. And so I see, you know, I'm in an isolated farm right now. I see farmers making art, you know what I mean? And art can save you. And I don't mean that in a sort of metaphorical way. I mean, it can save your life. So I feel like a lot of people are going towards that. They have that time, right? What am I going to do with the day that I have today, right? A lot of people are reaching for art. And I think that says a lot. I think that sort of touches on what we want to do and what art means to us. Is it saves us. It's solace. It's a place of refuge. And it's also a place of community. So I would say, you know, that's a beautiful thing. Go ahead.
What I get from that is, well, you know, when you're working with sessions, working with creative individuals on a daily and having briefs about your film, having briefs about, you know, what next steps, critique, etc. Fundamentally, you know, and this is controversial, but there's a lot of neuroscience evidence supporting that, you know, the expression of art, the medium of art, such as making music could be said it's some form of, it's like a language, right? It operates in the medial cortex of the brain, which is the inner dialogue, et cetera, aligned with the auditory cortex. So this is a great alignment with and correlative studies showing that it's like a language, right? So when I hear about therapy, et cetera, and helping people's lives, it's like, you know, you can't have behavioral therapy without talking, right? So it's very much like for the arts. You can't, you know, express what you're going through and start the therapeutic process without being an articulate communicator through your art form, through your language, right? So the more articulate you are about your craft, I think the more effective you become at distilling, you know, what it is you're going through and sharing that hopefully inspiring a connection, making other individuals feel the same way you have or can empathize with what you're going through. That's really key. Understanding that improving your craft can improve your therapeutic process as well. People are not really fully aware of the value beyond art as a expression of culture, expression of self, expression of you know, feelings, but more importantly, as a true language that you can master to become more effective at finding your place in the world.
And is it for both of you, Dana, is this going into your practice? Like, do you feel the moment going into your creative work, or do you anticipate it that this, like you were saying, kind of you're in a farmhouse, and at one point you said, go, you know, take this moment to put your creative fuel into it. I mean, do you see this going into your efforts going forward, whether it be in the content itself or even just shaping how you do content?
Absolutely. And, you know, I speak to so many artists that feel the same way. I feel really inspired. I am so blessed that I have so much time. I'm working on 4 different films. I'm so incredibly focused. I have to be focused. I mean, I travel a lot. I'm not going anywhere. And so there's a lot of things in my life and everybody's life that has changed. And it makes you really focus into, as Fernando was saying, what's important? What do I really want to say? What is this film really about? And then as you look at the world around you, you're watching the news. What do I want to say now? What's important to say now? Is this even valid? I mean, the films that you make, some of them, you look at them, you're like, oh, this has no place in the world right now. This is not the film that I want to make anymore. I think that changes it as well. So it absolutely changes everything. It's an opportunity. It's also a huge limitation. It's also, I'm watching so many friends and family and colleagues go belly up. It's a terrifying thing to witness. A lot of my friends are live musicians. How do you deal with that? Streaming doesn't do it. How am I going to, you know, go to a film festival. I've been to film festival. It's all that stuff too is a real struggle, and it's very stressful. It's very, very stressful. So it's this really weird time of like heightened stress. We're all trying to figure out like, oh, how are we gonna kind of make a living, right? Like, how is this going to work? The earth under our feet is sand, and it is moving for all of us, but for artists in particular. So, but does it affect me? Absolutely. Absolutely. And everybody, there's no doubt. I have so many conversations with artists that say similar things. It's very nuanced, not black or white. There's some really great things, but then there's other things that, people are going under, and that's scary, to all of us.
I'll add to that, and I'll say this. So non-delusional optimism is key in behavior economics, right? When you analyze, a marketplace, or you analyze the fundamentals of incentivized, input output, you can see that, it's important for performance to look at things positively, right? There's so much evidence in neuroscience supporting this, but honestly, I use it as a tool to fact check. And in reference to this point of, how do you stay productive? How do you stay creative in this space? And reality is, every conversation I'm having these days sounds like, holy F, I don't know what to do. For the first time in my life, I have no emails. For the first time in my life, I don't have incoming calls. There's no fires to put out. Because a lot of our businesses have stopped, right, completely. And so, this is not the most, there's more value in tactical at this point than rhetoric. And this is when I intervene with, my mentees, the communities that we all work together with, and give them tacticals, like real strategic to-dos, actionables to improve their productivity, right? I have this, and Joe, I was talking to you about this earlier, my philosophy, my new philosophy on the next few weeks even, right? Beyond like what's going to happen in February, first quarter of next year, second quarter of next year financially, and in our industry, in the arts. It's about adaptability, resilience, and openness to change, right? Staying dynamic, dexterity, being fluid with learning new things. I say, instead of looking at your inbox, take a look at something that interests you at this point, right? Make sure you reach out to people who are like Joe and Generator, who are creating real resources as to how to get, financial support, economic lines for your development, right? And Joe, I want to actually spring this off to you, because I think that resources are key. I think for those who do have the luxury to be working these days, in our industries particularly, it's important for us to advocate, hey, here's where you can go get help, or here's what we can do to help you. I think it's this time where everybody should pitch in, without a doubt. That's been, this is part of what we do. We're artists. We give, like every day we give, right? We're really good at this. Right. So what I hope to see happen in our industry is that more companies like Universal Music, like the Garibay Center, my company, Generator, et cetera, are moving towards impact. Right. Because even the bottom line equates to higher value when you give, right? Marketing, the new kind of social, bringing social value marketing is the state-of-day thing. It's a win-win. So I'll forgive my tangent, but I think it's super important to cover.
And this is where now I'll cross the wire and join you guys in this conversation a little bit. Both of you brought up just the tactical element of, hey, the festivals are shut down, and Fernando, we've talked so much about the effect of this on just the income in the music industry. And for listeners who are coming on, we're very spooked right now at Generator. We've had thousands of people go through our programs the last 3 months, and we saw the delays in the unemployment program. We saw the challenges with the payroll protection program in the economic injury disaster loan. And what I'll say is, please, if you're a person on this call who's worried about your income, who's worried about your tenancy rights, who's worried about your ability to buy food, please reach out to us. at Generator. Patty gave our email. There's, for example, one of the things that Fernando and I collaborated on early on was payroll protection program loans, which are still out there and I think might even be relevant again now that unemployment is expiring for a lot of sole proprietors who don't know that they're actually eligible and can have their income forgiven over the next 8 to 10 weeks. Or a lot of states are using money that's been recently distributed under the CARES Act to create grant programs. And we were calling across, we're across 10 states. And so we're tracking all of this. And, we'd find out that, Alabama or Florida or Texas was doing a program, and we'd immediately start trying to find creatives to say, this is eligible for sole proprietors and you can participate in this. But if you're worried about that very tactical income-based element of the next 90 days, please reach out. Again, with the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Act expiring on July 31st, I think we're going to see a new level of challenge in August. And I would hope, just based on anyone who's here and is interested in that sort of tactical, how do I keep going to keep my creativity going? Please do reach out, because it's something that I feel like as much as we may have done, we only scratched the surface of how much more cash we could have gotten for the creative community if we had helped them fully tool up for all these different programs. So please let us know and reach out. And again, I apologize for sort of jumping the line into that.
No, it's important to cover. I think that's most important. One of the most important things we share possibly, because you can't be creative if you don't eat. Right? You can't be creative if you don't have a roof over your head. The last thing you're thinking about is how I'm going to express my feelings, right? This is it's interesting, right? Dana, I'm sure you can relate really deeply with this. You have to starve for your art, right? To a certain degree, right? You have to earn it. And that builds resiliency, and it's all the benefits of working for your art, working for your craft, working to succeed, earning it, etc. Right? But there's also unnecessary suffering, right? And that, such as I got to get my feelings hurt to create great art. Like, no, you don't, right? We all have this part of our brain that can mirror behavior, right? We all have imagination and creativity that can picture what your feelings are, what you're going through, right? We can tell stories. I think art, it's really just effective narratives, right? And the world works through narratives. It's how we see the world. It's how individuals see the world, right? So that's all wonderful. But I think that right now it's about giving people resources, right? And this is the most exciting thing for me right now, is to hear stories from my mentees. Our music industry is suffering tremendously, right? Even before the pandemic, Joe, this is our plight for musicians, to help musicians is to sustain their income stream. And there is no income stream because, unfortunately, of the economics of our industry. But now with the pandemic added and social injustice, there's a huge disenfranchised majority industry. And so these initiatives Joe led and started to introduce these resources have helped so many people already. It's been incredible. Like, I can't express how important it is to look for resources that can help benefit your growth and more importantly, your sustainability.
Thank you, Fernando. And I want to just even going into this, sort of going to your kind of point about just how hard it can be to be creative if you can't eat. Dana, you had mentioned this is hitting. This is particularly hitting musicians hard because it's anything from your financial side to your creative side. I mean, Dana, do you have ideas, like if you're a listener on this and you feel like you're in a bit of a slump? Somebody had asked this question, how it was really good. If you're in a slump, what do you do to kind of break out of your slump? Do you have ideas about what to do to jumpstart yourself from maybe a challenge position to an opportunity position?
I mean, I think Fernando's right in saying that, it has never been easy to be an artist, ever. And it probably never will, especially in this country where we don't have really any government support. I think you have to be scrappy. I think you have to be open-minded. I think you have to be nimble. I don't have any concrete suggestions, but I do know that people in my medium in film, people are watching more than they've ever watched before. Film is absolutely vital. It is the sort of the anchor of our communication now, because we can't actually sit down in a room. So I feel like there's an opportunity there. People are binge watching movies, and in terms of documentaries, there's some amazing stories that really desperately need to be told. So I feel like there's opportunities out there, in film in particular, because people want to hear those stories. People want to feel connected. Film connects you with people. So I feel like there is sort of a need for more content because people are watching more. So that's an opportunity. But listen, it's never been easy, ever. And every film I do, I struggle for financing. And you gotta be scrappy, and that's kind of the name of the game. But I do feel like this is a time where there's opportunities.
And I'll give you direct tacticals. This is I get asked this question every day. And here's what I recommend is, and this is coming from years now of doing an average of 300 books a year, right? This is not said lightly, right? If you look at performance optimization to begin with, optimization, which is basically individuals that are trying to excel their current status of success, right? Performance optimization. What they've done, what's best in class for them is to have their calendar set the previous day, right? So, or days in advance, but really plan your day out ahead of time. In other words, it doesn't have to, you don't have to lock into this completely, but let's say it's as simple as waking up in the morning, already having a set schedule, right? So I'll give you an example of what, a couple of my days when I'm not really like heavily working on my businesses. It's really focusing on, I'm going to learn about, I'm going to focus on neuroscience today. I'm going to focus on neuroeconomics specifically today. These are the case studies I want to read, and they're on my calendar, and they show exactly what I'm going to go through hour by hour because I know my rate, right? So that's important, scheduling, right? And believe me, I'm the last person. I'm so ad hoc. I live on the edge of my seat, but I plan out this because distraction is a key towards social media taking your attention, right? So it's a key. Distraction can be the enemy at times, right? So we must be able to take back our attention, right? Our attention economy, and place it and where it's most valuable, that is with yourself, investing in yourself. So calendaring your day is important. Second is, if I'm going to give you a reference material, 2 books that I think you should take on you if you're stranded on an island or quarantined on an island now. It would be Jocko Willink, Ownership, Extreme Ownership, because it gives you Navy SEALs. It's a training guide, but it also gives you real solid, concrete to-dos under extreme situations and extreme leadership. Highly recommend that. Even if you don't read, like I do audio, I'm dyslexic, so I do audio nonstop. And so find your own version of learning that's easy for you and enjoyable. The second recommendation of book I have to recommend is The Power of Habit. I think it's by Charles Duhigg. So this is great. It's just basically built, I think, on Alfred Adler's habit formation model. I think it's Alfred Adler, but basically is, if you ever want to work on bettering yourself, look at habits, right? And any habit, it can be like quitting smoking, it can be anything. But what a great time it is now to take advantage that you do have a window where you can get rid of the habits you don't want to live on and continue living with, right? Through repetition. So those 2 books I highly recommend.
And I love this. I'll take your representation in it first. This is a question from Melissa on the event. I love this. Rather than starving for our art, can we change the language that we invest in our art by building our skills, resources, and crafts? This is, Fernando, you touched on it a little bit before we got on, but how do we think about this as a time to invest in ourselves? And any thoughts you guys have on that is great. Thank you, Melissa, for the question.
Yeah, when you have Dana, I'll let you kick it off if you like. I have so much I can add to this as far as day to day and what I see. And have been seeing for years in our industry. But one is, I'm going to quickly debunk the idea and the myth that you have to suffer for your art. The reality is, they've done numerous case studies showing that the brain actually outperforms a sober brain, a healthy brain outperforms a drunk and high brain. Right. So this idea that you have to, alter your state of reality through a chemical substance or whatever, I'm not against any of this or for any of this. What I'm saying is the evidence suggests that the brain performs more effectively and is more creative. That means higher output. You can measure it by staying, having a healthier mind, having a more positive approach to your day-to-day activity. So that's, in other words, if you're happy, you're performing more at a higher level and putting out more content than someone who's not. Right, or a brain that's not as high as, or is on something, or etc. So the myth of suffering for your art, it comes down to this. I think it's the idea that we understand and how we make sense of the world through stories. And it is the telling of stories that helps us connect and define our worldview. So now more than ever, like Dana mentioned, movies and these narratives that are more accessible are going to help you see the world differently, right? So by being aware, one, get rid of the myth that you have to suffer for your art. I think it's about collecting experiences, right, rather than suffering. So if you want to talk about reframing the notion of, suffering or trauma for the art, it's about understanding and collecting stories for your art. So that's one way. The second is trauma is effective. And I hear this a lot. When I deal with musicians and high performers, I'm talking about major icons. The majority have been depressed, right? The majority have suffered from what would be considered, some sort of mental illness or some sort of extreme trauma, or come from post-traumatic growth. The only thing that we are certain of is that PTG, post-traumatic growth, creates divergent thinking, right? And that is thinking differently. Your worldview is altered, right? But that's extraordinary, because if you use it effectively, trauma can be a great catalyst for change. But doesn't mean that you have to have trauma to create greatness, right? It's just a catalyst. There's multiple catalysts. You can get a great catalyst for change by watching an incredible movie, reading an incredible book, right? Hearing stories from others that have been through extraordinary things, and doing them a service by telling their story through your gift. You see? So it's a myth.
Dana, I'll throw it to you.
I want to add a little bit to that. I agree with what you're saying. We don't need to suffer, but we need to work like hell. We need to work so hard. And I get frustrated with people sometimes. The average length of an independent documentary is 6 years. It takes 6 years on average to make an independent documentary. It takes a long time. People don't understand that. And in order to do the work, you don't necessarily have to suffer, but you have to work much harder than most people understand. And I'll sort of piggyback on what you're saying about concentration. In order to have an artistic idea, creative thought, a creative aspiration, whatever, you have to have uninterrupted time. I worry about, and I'm older, so I am not a digital native, but I worry about the distractions of social media, of Instagram, of TikTok, or whatever. I see my kids, for example, distracted every 2 minutes. I feel like that could be dangerous to creative thought. You need to have, in order to edit a documentary, for example, you need to sit down. My best work is when I sit down for like 10 hours straight, and I'm like, okay, this is the scene I'm going to work on. Everybody works differently, but I want to underline that it's the work is so much harder than most people understand, and it takes time. Everything takes time. A painting takes time. A song takes time. And I think that so many people are like, oh God, I should have finished this. I'm writing a song. It should have been finished last week. Well, no, sometimes it takes so much longer than anybody knows.
This is a great point. There's so much to back this up scientifically, but essentially, deliberate focus is key, right? I think, nothing against the Googles, the Facebooks, and et cetera of attention economies, but the reality is, if you can harness your focus to become more deliberate as to your output and to your needs, I think that's key. Managing your time is really important and extraordinary hard work. I mean, but I think that's not said enough, Dana, is that to be great, you have to be willing to put a great amount of time into your work. It's fundamentally, it's not a flaw, it's a feature.
And it's a sacrifice. I mean, with what you give, you're going to lose something. You're going to give something up.
Yeah.
So it's also a reality. It's very hard. It's a vocation. But I think I don't think that needs to be suffering, but I think you really have to put your nose to the grindstone and understand that anyone who's successful and most people, they work constantly. They're incredibly disciplined. I'm doing a documentary on a musician. Her name is Ani DeFranco. She never stops working. I don't know about Lady Gaga, but I'd assume she looks like a workaholic to me. I mean, there's a reason why, and it's focus. It's that focus and that drive. It takes that drive because it's hard. It's really hard.
We're down to our last 2 minutes. I want to give both of you just have kind of a brief wrap up. We'd love to just kind of get your final thoughts on. All right, we're going to be ending this program for a week. It's been a great program for us. Thank you both for joining us. But we'd love to get just your last thoughts on here we are. We're going forward into this great unknown. How are you thinking about it, Dana?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. This has been so much fun talking to you guys. I said this before. I feel like this is a time of opportunity. It's so exciting. It's a time of change. The world has to change. I think we're seeing that now. As artists, we have a responsibility to be part of that change. We have to lead that change. Making art is not about facts. It's about making people feel, and feeling emotions is actually the impetus for change, much stronger than facts. We know the glaciers are melting, but I do think that art has a singular ability to inspire people and to inform people and to get people off their seats. And so there's a lot of things going on in the world, but I think that art, look at the Black Lives Matter, it's just yellow letters on the street, but that's art. That was an artistic movement. Look at how that, inspired people. So I feel like our role as artists is really important. And I take it really seriously, but I feel like there's a lot going on in the world. It's very exciting, but it's an opportunity for people. I think there's a lot to be said, and I think people have to get their voices out into the void, and I think artists' voices need to be out there, and I also feel like we need to collaborate. I feel like in the COVID age, hierarchy is shifting, it's changing. And I think we're becoming, our government is not, but I think people are understanding that we need to be more humane. So yeah, I want to encourage people to take advantage of this incredible opportunity that we're having and this exciting, terrifying moment that we're living in. And to become, sorry guys, vote, get politically active. It's so important. It is so important to be politically involved at this moment in time. Our future and our children's future depends on it. So I feel like we have a responsibility to do that as well. Vote, 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 vote. That's what I'd say too. Sorry, had to plug it in.
I love it. Fernando, we got about 20 seconds. I'm a little over. So 20
okay,
seconds.
Great. If I can give you 3 things to think about for from now and 3 things I wish I've heard when I was little is failing is a key to succeeding, right? Number 1. Number 2 is feelings are one of the most powerful motivators. So if you want to move into action, feel it, right? Allow yourself to feel. The limbic system is such a driver for performance. 3, talk to yourself like you would talk to your friends.
I love that.
It's the most powerful thing I think I could ever, share is talk to yourself like you talk to someone you care about. Because if you don't, you set yourself off on the wrong foot, and you're just creating a huge disadvantage.
Thank you both. I'll turn it over to Patty, but it was a pleasure to talk to both of you as friends today. So thank you both, and Patty.
Thank you guys so much. Thanks, Fernando. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you so much again today to Dana and Fernando and Joe. Thank you so much for helping DC creatives in this way. A video of this webinar will be found on our resource page, our Vimeo page, and our YouTube. Feel free to share this with friends or other colleagues in your network. We also have resource page of different webinars that have gone on throughout the week. Again, feel free to share these. We also still have one-on-one consultations with the Generator staff still happening. Other than that, thank you so much for being a part of our program.